we have Nicole Hanna, Executive Director of Vineyard. Henderson possesses an expansive skill set in dementia education, training, and support, and is an expert in senior fitness, rehabilitation, and programming. A graduate of Everest University with a BS and MA in business management, Nicole has published numerous scholarly articles on the challenges of aging. We don't have any challenges, do we? Oh, man. Also dementia and caregiving. In her lecture, Nicole is going to compare and contrast normal versus not normal aging. Don't we all have that question? You know, we lose our keys, we can't find them, we finally find them, we say, oh, that was just normal. And then the grandkids show up and you go, I know what your name is. I can figure it out. Okay, let's welcome Nicole Hanna.
Thank you. And it's working? Okay. All right, and can everybody hear me? All right, and I'm a little short, so am I good down here? Everybody can see me? Fabulous. Okay, we're gonna work through the clicker and we are gonna give this presentation. So tonight I just wanna say thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to present on aging versus not normal aging. And oftentimes not normal aging, folks start wondering, is this dementia? Or do I need to worry? So what I did is I created this outline today to walk through normal aging and then not normal aging, and then I started walking through what is dementia, because oftentimes that's the next question I get. So I wanted to go ahead and break that down. I made this as simple as possible, but please know I can send this to anyone that is interested, and I've got about 150 more presentations. So if you guys have any questions or concerns, my #1 project has been for the last 25 years is really educating and elevating in our awareness, understanding a lot of the diseases that we just don't talk about. And one of those being, is this normal, is it not? And is it dementia? So that's what I'm presenting to you tonight. Let's see if this works. Okay, we're gonna have fun, folks. Are you able to click for me? There we go. Okay, so this is me. I always try to give you guys a little bit of history about myself. I started in nursing as an RN in 1995 in skilled nursing. From there, I went into therapy in high-risk clinical cases, and that was my passion in my own company for 13 years. When our market started to change in 2009 to 2012, I decided it was time to go back to school. So from there, I went on and got my bachelor's and my master's. But in doing so, it really allowed me to take my clinical experience with my therapy experience and go into the assisted living model. From there, I was able to start taking over assisted livings, for lack of a better word. I fell in love with the clinical aspect, but I also fell in love with the different model. It wasn't so clinical. It allowed individuals to have a life, have quality, have engagement, without having the shiny floors and chair rails to compare it to. And that was really where my passion took off in the industry, to start opening assisted livings, memory cares, independent livings, and doing that on a national level, doing it on a state level, and now bringing that to Nevada with a new community that we're opening. I'm not here to sell you on that community, but what I do is specialize in Alzheimer's and dementia. And that's really what fuels my passion for giving these talks, to educating our community to really understand this disease, because we see it everywhere we go. And if we can take some of the fear out of it, then we can start to understand it and we can embrace this and we can start to create some more solutions. Okay, let's see. Let's keep trying. I figure if I keep hitting buttons, it's gonna work, right? Oh, you're wonderful, thank you. All right, so folks, I'm not gonna read every slide to you. I'm gonna walk through those a little bit. Your body's undergoing changes while you age. Some of those are normal, some of those are not. The point of today's conversation is to really educate you on what is okay, what's normal, and what's not. And when it's not, knowing what to do with that information so that you can get the answers you need and have the resources you need to get those answers and make the steps necessary to moving forward through whatever that fear is. I'm ready. All right, so the big question of the night, right? What is normal aging? Go right ahead. I'm ready for you. So normal aging, there's several different categories that as we age, we start noticing. So please note that after age 30 to 35, these things start becoming more clear. Being in mid-40s, I can say I'm definitely starting to notice some of these things. But what we start to know is physically our heart and blood vessels. Things start changing, right? Of the United States, many Americans are on a high blood pressure medication or a high cholesterol. Okay, that's heart and blood related any way you look at it. We're also looking at bones. What starts happening? So men and women are a little bit different as to our bone and our muscle density, but that starts changing in our 30s. It's unbelievable. For men, it can happen earlier than that. So they start peaking a little bit earlier physically, but we start to see this decline happen as we age. For those of my clients that I work with in a physical level or in an exercise level, 2 weeks of inactivity, you start to see a reduction in your muscle mass that quick. So it's that muscle mass that supports the bones. As we start aging and we start becoming more sedentary, we start seeing those things change more rapidly. Fair enough? Okay. Ready for you? Thank you. So muscles, I just tapped into that. So I have a lot of folks that I've worked with over the past couple decades, and that being said, some of my folks were very active. One of my favorite residents, Miss Ruth, was 96. We went to the gym every day. 5 a.m. she was there taking 3 classes, finished with a glass of wine, and then she was having her nap and going to bed by 4 p.m. That was her day. So she was one of my few that muscle mass actually stayed quite active, and she was able to teach class, take class, and do more than a lot of my 20-year-olds because her muscles had stayed fit. However, her bone density had shrunk with the age and being the age that she was. For bladder and bowel, this is something that we don't talk a lot about, but it's something that definitely changes. For males and females, this can happen at different times. Ladies, for those of us that have children and we get the opportunity to be a mom, our bodies change much younger. So we are usually dealing with some of these issues much longer than the men are. However, this is very common for both to start happening. Accidents, changes, even changes in our schedules and our patterns are something that are normal through the aging process. So none of these things give reason for alarm. Skin. So now that we have the wonderful media, social media, advertising, drug makers, all of these lovely things on the television, everything that can help skin is out there, right? So what we all start noticing after our 40s, 50s, 60s is our skin starts getting thinner. That's because of medications, it's because of the aging process. A lot of that we can't change. So there's no reason for alarm. If you want to find something to fix it, I promise you turn on your TV at 3 a.m., record anything, and you will find a solution. From vision, vision changes. Some of us are lucky and we start going very short arms about our 30s. Now my newspaper can no longer reach past my arms, so I usually have to leave it on the table so I can read it. But these are things that are all, again, normal. Having some differences between farsighted and nearsighted, it's normal. Needing some readers to help enhance what you're seeing up close, all of that's normal. So there's still no reason for alarm as of yet. All right, so mental health and memory and thinking. Normal. You're on the phone. Mrs. Smith, how you doing today? We're having a conversation. We're making a plan to go get our hair and nails done. Got to go get the keys. We still got to go to the grocery store. And lo and behold, you're already in the living room after hanging up the phone and you forgot where your keys were. Has anybody done this? Okay. So, normal aging. If you can literally trace your steps back to that phone, normal aging allows you to recall. It's when you can go back to the place where you had that original thought. You made your plan to get your hair and your nails done. Now you were walking into another room to grab your keys, and lo and behold, your brain is already working 3 times over because you're out the door, in the car, going to get your hair and nails done. Fair enough? When you're retracing your steps and you're able to realize, oh, yep, keys are here, phone is here, this is where I'm going, all normal. One of my favorite patients in all my years was 103. And this gentleman, bless his heart, they had labeled he had dementia. At 103, we were okay with that. His thing was the best saying I've heard yet. He said, "Little miss, I don't have dementia. I have a lot more files up there and it takes me longer to find them." So fair enough. That's what we went with. Right ahead. So not normal. Are we feeling good about what's normal so far? Short, sweet, and easy, right? Okay, so now we're going to go into some of the things that may create some alarm or some question marks. All right. So the things that I want to go ahead and preemptively say is when we're talking Alzheimer's dementia, I'm going to differentiate between the two in just a moment. But what I want to share with you is that a lot of things happen as we start getting older. I lose my phone 5 times a week. 20, 30 years from now, if I'm not losing my phone, that would be a reason for alarm. I'm just being honest. If you're an accountant and you're used to balancing your checkbooks every month, for those that still use checks, if you're used to going through the checkbook, balancing your account, making the bills, signing the check, putting it in your check registry, and next month you can't do that, that's a reason for alarm. So through this whole talk, I'm going to give you examples, because sometimes reading things is not as easy as putting it to play and what that would look like. So I'm going to give you a little bit of both on the not normal, because this is where I see the greatest cause of alarm in most of the folks I get to meet with these years. When you're doing everyday tasks that you would do every day throughout your journey or throughout your marriage, and all of a sudden you can't do that in some way or another, it's just not going to happen. That's a red flag. That's when you want to note that. Put a day and a time and what happened. Just hold on to it. Every now and then is one thing, but if we start seeing a pattern in our partner, that's where you want to start making those notes, because that is something that is different. That's when I claim it's not normal aging. It's not something you did every day. For instance, one of my gentlemen I'm working with right now, he's a retired surgeon and a retired engineer. Meticulous to every detail. Everything must be solid, square, and to a point. Fair enough, we check it 3 times, right? That's who I'm working with. He's lost the ability to put a puzzle together because the pieces don't match. That's a red flag for me. A gentleman that is equipped to do everything the same way repeatedly every time he goes into it, and now it doesn't work, that's a red flag. Fair enough? Starting to make sense? Okay, so next we're looking at dementia. What I'm going to show you in a couple slides is the term for dementia. I use an umbrella because it's going to make this so much easier. Dementia is the umbrella term, and we're going to see that in just a moment. What you're finding here is this is when we start using that diagnosis or that what if. We're starting to see, are we changing in our ability to speak? Are we losing our ability to find our words when it's not our normal? I have friends now that never find their words, and that's okay because that's their normal for 20 years. For someone that is an avid journalist, a writer, a reader, someone who's no longer able to say, what are we doing today? It's the what are, yep, okay. Those nouns start disappearing, or we start losing that ability for fine motor skills, buttoning our blouse, tying our shoes, turning the keys on the car. Little things that are normal habits now become unhabitual. We start thinking, someone that may be preemptively developing this disease is not going to get the It's just going to be the moment. It's when I start talking to friends, roommates, partners, spouses, that I say, is this normal? And they go, no. And that's my red flag. Okay, I'm ready. So here's a few other things. CDC also points out the inability to complete a task. So for my teachers, my educators, my bankers, my folks that are accustomed to routine, task, schedule, list, signing off, it's when we're not doing that that we need to think something's a little out of norm. When we start having difficulty with naming items, close family members, not knowing their names. And there's a why behind this that I'm going to get into, I promise. I just want to plant the seed. Forgetting how things work. That's a big one. For my engineers, thankfully being in Florida for 20 years, I worked with a lot of my NASA engineers over at the Space Center my engineers that were no longer able to compute how a strategy would go or how a math algorithm would go, something that they had done for 40, 50 years. That was something that we were starting to note, their inability to complete something beginning to end. And if any of you are engineers, you know that that is not a good place to be. We need to finish what we start, right? When it comes to forgetting how things operate, figuring it out, when we're not able to turn on the iron, we're not able to turn our curling iron on, when opening a nail polish doesn't make sense anymore. These are things that we want to start paying attention to because that's not normal. When we start repeating questions, this is something that many of my caregivers actually really struggle with. Many of my clients right now that I work with on a one-on-one basis, they may ask me the same question 30 times in 5 minutes. And it's my job to keep rolling with that. So it's something that can become very difficult when you have someone that keeps interrupting and they keep asking the same question. Understanding here in a moment, I'm going to explain the why behind it. When it's taking much longer to complete normal tasks, this is something I see more on the early onset of things. When we have those routines, which I'm going to keep repeating, but now it's just not working as well. A lot of the women I work with, they're accustomed to being homemakers. That was much of their lives growing up and in their marriages. So house cleaning may become more difficult. Figuring out that vacuum, or if every Sunday we do X, Y, and Z, and now it's Z and X, and we forget the Y. See where I'm going with that? Next is when we start misplacing things. I'm going to go ahead and put parentheses there and say sometimes that's accompanied with some paranoia. I promise it does come with this disease. And then not being able to retrace our steps. So I wanted to finish with that one because a few moments ago I was talking about missing those keys, right? And I lose mine all the time. It's just, if I ever start finding my keys, they're going to know it's a red flag for me. I'm terrible about that, phone and keys. So it's when we're not able to walk backwards or to walk into that other room and get that recall that we need to know that's a little off. We should always be able to go back to the point of origin. Go back over that conversation with Mrs. Smith. Go back over the hair and nails and remember, oh yeah, and get that aha moment. Sometimes I need to go backwards 3 times, but eventually it'll kick. It's when that never comes back, that recall doesn't come back, that we know that's not normal. And those are things that I really want you to keep a notebook, a log. I've got guides, I've got books, there's a million free resources. One of the ones we use is from the LaRuvo Center that you'll be meeting Susan Hirsch. She's amazing. So there's a book there that walks through just some high points of should I be worried? And if so, it tells you some of the things you should write down. So there's all kinds of tools that we can use as well. Ready? So now the big question. Does everybody kind of have a clear idea of normal versus not normal? Okay, so now we're going to walk the scary word of dementia. We all ready? I see everybody got real still. All right, we're ready. All right, so here's that lovely umbrella. I'm terribly sorry it didn't come through as clear as it did on my computer. But dementia is an umbrella. You're going to hear terms like Lewy bodies, frontotemporal lobe, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. All of those fall under the umbrella. So here's the thing you don't know, maybe. There's over 100 forms of dementia. Crazy, right? Of those, you're going to hear of approximately 10 in common everyday language. Of those, about 4 that are common. Those are going to be your Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementias, Lewy bodies, and frontal temporal lobes. Everybody feel good about that? You ready to move on? Any questions so far? So I'm going to elaborate. Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's disease is the longest lasting dementia. Okay, so we always ask, right? What's the lifespan with this disease? I'm going to be honest. Every form of dementia averages 6 weeks to 20 years. There's your answer. Some of the rarer forms of dementia, by the time they're actually diagnosed, they've already passed. It's that aggressive. They're very rare. They're very hard to detect. By the time they do, it's usually beyond the point of treatment. The ones that we know the most about are the ones that you're gonna see here, because Alzheimer's is usually an average lifespan of 10 years within the disease, active disease. The reason I put that parentheses on that is because early onset dementia, it's where we start forgetting some things, we start forgetting to remember some names, we may start missing some appointments, but all of those folks tend to top up as pretty much early aging, right? Oh, that's normal. Instead of writing those notes down when things aren't normal. So by the time we actually tend to get a diagnosis, an individual is usually in middle stages of dementia. They've made it much easier for us now. There's early, there's middle, and there's late. There used to be 8 and 9 stages, so we've made it simpler. But the fact of the matter is by the time we're in middle stage, that's usually when my caregivers and families are going, what am I gonna do? We're already in crisis, okay? So I'm gonna put some of that into perspective for you. When it comes to vascular dementias, individuals that have had strokes, huge cause factor. My dad had vascular dementia, my mother-in-law had vascular dementia. Both of them, repeated strokes, heart attacks, cause problems with their vascular system. All of the areas that take blood and oxygen to our body were damaged. That creates damage in the brain. With that, we start seeing an impact. This next slide I'm gonna show you in just a minute is gonna walk you through the different parts of the brain that control what. And then I'm gonna make it a little bit simpler so it makes sense. With Lewy body dementias, this is the one that a lot of folks run away from. This is the one that tends to have hallucinations. We have delusions. Oftentimes they're up at night. They're sleepwalking. They're awake walking. They tend to have a lot of aggression. This is a tough one. These folks are usually hallucinating or seeing children, humans, or animals. Almost 99% of the time. If I hear hallucinations and up at night or active behaviors with physical behaviors, 9 times out of 10, it's Lewy bodies. This is a tough one. This is one that oftentimes it's best with an individual in a controlled environment because this burns out my spouses. This is a tough one to manage one-on-one because you're not gonna get the sleep that you need to continue to endure. This is where we bring outsiders in, or we go to specialists for a controlled environment because this one can excel rather quickly. This is an individual that can comprehend what we're reading, what we're seeing, but also there's a lot of paranoia, and that can create some active behaviors. Another time I see Lewy bodies really exacerbate with all of those symptoms is for my veterans. My veterans, I work a lot with PTSD. I work a lot with military. My father was military. And I got to learn a lot of this firsthand caring for him. With the vascular dementia, he also had the Lewy bodies. We also had the Agent Orange. We had a lot of underlying factors. But it allowed me to start seeing the impacts that the military and PTSD can have when we start facing dementia. With that, we start going back because that's an older memory. Those older memories are not always pleasant with the military. Wartime veterans, again, not so pleasant depending upon where they were. That being said, we've got added stresses. It's a long-term memory, we're holding on to it, and it definitely changes the way we need to provide that care and support because it brings them back to a different era. So oftentimes I need to coach my families or my caregivers or the company that's involved so that we can go back to wartime and we learn how to foster that relationship. Last but not least is the frontal temporal lobe. This is only about a 2 to 4%. The only other addition to all of these is you see that huge list of other dementias. The one that they don't put under there that's also now being commonized is Parkinson's. Parkinson's is a form of dementia. Oftentimes now we're seeing multiple dementias. So we're seeing vascular dementia with Parkinson's, or we're seeing frontal temporal lobe with Parkinson's, or we're seeing Lewy bodies with Parkinson's. And oftentimes when we start seeing an individual that's got that shuffle, or we've got the unsteady gait, or we start to show the dyskinesia, which is almost like a tremor with the hands, or it's a repetitive movement, that's where we're starting to see that combined with these other dementias. And that's where we're starting to educate more that Parkinson's is the same form of dementia, falls under that umbrella. It's still a disease of the brain. So now what you need to know is that everything you see listed there attacks the brain differently. So not only are we trying to find a cure for a disease that affects every one of you differently, each one of us will have different symptoms. Each one of us will have different personalities, different experiences. So it's very understandable why we don't have a one-size-fits-all cure when there's not a one-size-fits-all disease. The way I train my team and the other teams that I get the opportunity to teach in this disease and how to care for this disease is that if you know one person with dementia, you know one person with dementia. We can have a room of 300 people and every one of us bring about different history, different personality, different experiences. Therefore, how our brain progresses is indicative of how your brain is being affected by this disease. What we do know is there's some common factors with each of these and certain parts of the brain that tend to be affected first. So that's helped us kind of identify certain symptoms, as you will, that come with each of these and what accompanies each diagnosis because of the symptoms that we see, and that kind of helps us tailor into the type of disease and then the type of treatment plan and then the type of engagement, and the list goes on from there. Go right ahead. All right, so here's that great picture of the brain. So first and foremost, what I want to say to you is that this picture of the brain will be about 75% less at the end stage of this disease. It's mind-boggling, right? So I've been very fortunate to see some brain scans from early onset to end stage of multiple diagnoses, and the damage that it has on the brain itself, there's no words that I can really give that. It's 3/4 of your brain is gone. So when I'm training families and caregivers in the community about this disease, so many folks like to focus on the disease itself. It's dementia. We were just at an expo a couple weeks ago, and I tell you over 10,000 individuals over 55 attended. And I would say 50% of them all jumped away from our table as soon as they learned that Vineyard was about memory care and educating on dementia. They said, nope, I don't want it. So this is something we desperately need to do, is to educate, because so many folks, when we're afraid of something or we don't understand it, our reaction is we don't want to have anything to do with it, right? Well, I tend to be a little vocal, so I want people to know this disease, because once you do, it's mind-blowing what you can actually accomplish through the stages of this disease when you understand what's happening. And that's my other goal. So what you're going to find is that of these 6 areas of the brain, the one common factor in dementia of all forms is that every one affects the language barrier. Language side of the brain is the left. Funny rhythmic, right side is rhythm. Music, dance, all of that stays till the very end. Music is the universal language. I can speak to any population through music with this disease, and we can create an outcome. Because rhythm, we move to. We don't lose that. With language, we do. Language in the left side of the brain is affected in all forms of dementia. I've had extreme cases over the years. Miss Justine, I'm going to tell you about in a moment, but Miss Justine was my journalist. She was an author. She was a writer, had been so for 50 years. She was amazing, and bless her heart, as she progressed in this disease, we went months trying to figure out a solution. Miss Justine, when I came in for the day and assisted her with getting ready, it was, hey, oh, yep, okay. And it was my job to figure that out. It's a little tough, but she was my perfect example of losing nouns. She had the type of dementia that accompanied with a lot of anxiety because she could not find her words. Her brain had been attacked on that left side so greatly that I could dance with her to get anything done. But it ended up, we brought the family in. She had 2 daughters. They weren't very close, but they had pictures from their whole childhood. We were able to use these pictures to create a book for the nouns. Justine lost all of her nouns. It was unlike anything, but every day we had to figure out what all the verbs and adjectives meant without the nouns, until we could piece her room with enough pictures on her wall to let her point to what noun she needed at that moment. And we saw her anxiety go down. We saw her excitement go up. all of a sudden we empowered an individual who had lost her voice. And those words were her power. That was her life. So it's sometimes just about figuring out the puzzle pieces and making sense of it all. But with her, we found our success and she found her power. And because of that, she had another 10 years that she got to reside in that community because she had power over her words. And that let her have a longer life. In my heart, I truly believe that. When it comes to sensory, motor, when it comes to our ability to spell, it all uses different parts of the brain. Interestingly enough, that occipital lobe is visual. I'm going to give you guys a last exercise at the very end tonight to give you an example of what it's like to have this disease at the middle or later stages. Because visually, this is something that is highly disrupted. Visually, at the back of that occipital lobe, what's happening is that we're starting to lose peripherals the minute we develop this disease. Oftentimes, long before anybody knows there's a problem. So what we start seeing is depth perception. Our ability to see the change in carpet and floor, it changes, it looks different. Sometimes we start seeing folks take a bigger step, or we miss the door handle because it looks farther than it is. Books start changing. Door handles to open and go into a room start changing. Depth perception, as well as perception changes. So if you think normal aging, we can see peripheral at both sides to our fingers, right? With this disease, not only does it close in, but it closes up close. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys an exercise at the end of tonight, just to give you something to take away with. But you imagine everything becomes very close. At the end of this disease, it'd be like looking through one pen without the ink in it. So lots of changes going into that occipital lobe. Vision is often always changed. How aggressive it is depends on the type of dementia. But this is how we can make some improvements in the home. And this is how we can also change when we have an individual that may start going outside, maybe when they shouldn't. There's little things we can do. Black rugs in front of doors are a wonder because visually it can look like a hole. It's a different texture, it's a different color, and that can often deter somebody that's further along in this disease from crossing it. Little things. When we start looking at temporal lobe, this is where we start seeing language interfering a great deal, all words. We start seeing memory of new things not happening. It's that recall. I went and met with a family a couple months ago, and I helped a woman in her garden. This was her favorite pastime. However, about every 15 seconds, she would repeat what we were doing. So she had about a 15-second capture before we had to start over. So in that hour that we were together, we did the garden and we plucked leaves off of multiple bushes, but we had the same conversation. But each one took a little bit different spin. So it was like being on a nice little roller coaster, but it was very pleasant. And we would keep adding on every 15 minutes, but starting back at the basics. Anybody have any questions on some of this before I keep going? Okay, yes, sir.
Does your brain actually shrink physically when you have dementia?
I'm going to repeat for you, I promise. I won't even make you wait. He asked if your brain physically shrinks with the progression of the disease. The answer is yes. You will lose almost 75% of the mass and the folds and the fill of your brain. So what's interesting is that when you get to see a brain, I love clinical and I try not to get too clinical, but it's so full. You imagine two fists, and this is about the size of all of our brains, right? However, when an individual that at end stage of this disease has less than this much mass or density left, all forms of dementia, and this is where I really struggle with my clinical team because not everybody learns this in nursing school. You don't always learn this in other schools, is that this is a disease of the brain. And when we start attacking the brain, attacking the content, destroying the folds of the brain, the way they're all wired and connected and all those fun things that make us who we are, as we start losing that, our memories change. And this is where we usually start getting argumentative with our loved ones because we know the details of that memory and they're not saying it right. But what's interesting is that their memories often fall into like a one-stream video roll. And that's their whole life. Okay, so if you imagine we're gonna pick and choose whatever falls on that reel, and that makes our movie, it may or may not be real, but that's their world and their reality. And that's where we have to jump into their world and reality because their brain is in a place that we can never bring back into our world. It's no longer able to compute and rationalize. It's in its own reel. And the best thing we can do is get on that reel with them. We need to just acknowledge whatever is going on is going on. It may be crazy as we would see it, but the reality is their reality is that real. And it's up to us to find our way to that ride, and it's up to us to know when we need to step out and breathe. Fair enough? Yes, ma'am. Good question. So the question is, what is inside the brain where your brain used to be? What's inside the skull? Fluid and a diminished brain. That's what's left. So if you imagine we've got this little bit of fluid around the brain because it's kind of in there, right? We don't want to joggle it around too much. So when this starts shrinking, there's more space in there. There's more folds. It turns gray. Our brain can have a pinkish, healthy, vibrant color at times in a scan. But when we start progressing with this disease, you see the physical death of the brain. The cells die, they turn a gray, almost shrunk, small folds, thin, rather than full and plump. So it's a dramatic change from beginning to end. Yes?
On the last slide, you mentioned frontal dementia.
Yes.
But you didn't really describe it.
Okay.
Doing that.
Not at all. So she asked about frontal temporal lobe dementia. So what we're going to find is frontal temporal lobe, in my opinion, is rather aggressive when it comes to verbalizing. This is where I tend to see a rapid decline in their ability to speak. You're also going to find this is thinking. For instance, my gentleman, that's my engineer and surgeon. So his favorite pastime was eating ice cream. Great dessert. When we noticed that he was rapidly declining, which he was showing signs of decline about every 2 weeks for the last 8 months. So it's been very aggressive. He would go into the kitchen at first and grab a spoon and grab a spoonful of ice cream, and the bowl would be on the counter and he'd walk. Then he knew, okay, it's time to go get ice cream, and we'd forget the spoon and leave the freezer open and bring a bowl. The ability to put in line, rationalize, make an executive decision was completely diminished and very aggressively. He also lost his ability to communicate very rapidly. The words were not there. I can get a few words out of him in 30 minutes, but none of that is a full sentence or a full thought. You're also going to see controlling emotions. So one of my female clients several years ago, she had frontal temporal lobe, and she was an educator and the wife of a surgeon. And she was very regimented. They had 4 children. They all went to Ivy League schools. They were all doctors and attorneys. And she kept her whole family in line, and she was 4'10", so she was my Spitfire. And with the progression of this disease, she lost her ability to balance, to manage, to keep everybody in their compartments, as she called them, to manage what they were doing on a given day, to remember who was calling or what they did. It happened very rapidly. With her, she had an undertone of a lot of aggression. You're going to learn more about that in just a minute. There's a spot on the right side of the brain that becomes unlocked, and that's where we can see some of those no-no actions. But this is one of those types of diseases that we see that very rapidly. I don't see the longevity like I do in Alzheimer's with frontal temporal lobe at this time. Yes, sir?
What about brain shrink? Is the rate of shrinkage determine how much dementia we
Oh, that's a great question. All right, folks. So we asked, do everybody's brain shrink? And does that determine how much or the type or the rate of dementia we have? So normal aging, our brains do not shrink. With dementia, brains shrink. The type of dementia can cause the rate of aggression of the dementia to shrink faster. Alzheimer's, it happens slower. From everything that the research is out right now and from my personal observations, Alzheimer's can last 10, 20 years, depending on the type of medication, the health of the individual, the past history, and habits can slow down that progression to some extent. With the other types of dementias listed here, the frontal temporal lobe, the Lewy bodies, those happen on a much more accelerated rate in my experience. There's a new medication out this year. It's starting here in Las Vegas. It's about slowing down the progression of the disease, and it has been out on a trial basis to be released here. So we may have our first medicine to slow down the progression of certain types of dementias with this new medication. Fingers crossed. Good question. Yes, sir?
Yes, just a point of information. You said normal brain is, the healthy brain is pinkish, and when it shrinks, it becomes gray. Where did the term gray matter come from?
Oh, you know, so he asked, the normal brain is pink. As the brain dies with this disease, it becomes gray, and he wants to know where the term gray matter comes from. I would actually have to look. I don't know that off the top of my head. Yes, sir.
Has enough research been done to identify if any of the different types of dementia run in families to greater degrees or not? Or is there any connection?
Okay.
Say if you compare Parkinson's versus the Lewy dementia that you talked about.
Great question. So the question is about genetics. To sum that up, do we have research that's been produced or published that shows if we're at a greater risk if genetically someone else is being predisposed or had this diagnosis of dementia or Parkinson's? The answer is yes. Genetics does play a big role in that. However, there's always a however. I think what we're working with right now on research and science is that a lot of dementia has been identified as building plaques and proteins in the brain. They often call it plaques and tangles. Without getting too clinical, what I can tell you is that some of us are predisposed to those increased plaques and proteins, but we can show brains that are eaten up with plaques and proteins with no cognitive impairment. So while they say yes, you are at a potentially increased risk genetically, there's still a lot of I don't knows. We're still waiting to see. Right now they're offering the protein binder test. It's a genetic test that can show if you have the proteins that are indicative of Alzheimer's. But it doesn't mean you're going to get Alzheimer's, but it means you have the proteins. So I think the next step is really trying to identify if the proteins are the sole cause of that disease, because we now have medications that can eliminate those proteins in the brain, but it's not reversing the cognitive impairment. So we're back at square one on that one as well. Yes, sir.
Can you say anything about proper sleep versus not getting the proper sleep and see changes due to the lack of good sleep?
Oh, absolutely. So the question is about sleep. I love this question. So is there a right amount to get? Is there a wrong amount to get? Can we start seeing other things that come with lack of sleep? So let's go back to what America presents as ideal. They present 6 to 8 hours as ideal. I know some days I'm 6, some days I'm 10. It really varies on the day. Having good health patterns throughout your life are shown to help build a type of resilience or resistance to many types of disease, up to including the progression of that disease. So one of the talks I did recently was on nutrition and how it can combat the effects of Alzheimer's. Crazy concept, but a lot of what we do with our bodies physically, nutritionally, emotionally, can combat and even reduce your risk at developing one of these diseases. It's mind-boggling. So now that we have that, we know that if you continue with proper sleep patterns and you're getting that, and that's normal, I wouldn't say anything was worryable. I would say that if you're accustomed to getting 8 to 10 hours a night, and now you're getting 4 hours at night and a couple hours mid-morning and a couple hours in the afternoon, and you're not rested and you're restless and maybe you're up all around the clock, that would not be a normal. And I'd want to find out why. So there are types of dementias that do not allow you to sleep through the night. And if you've got some of the other factors or some of those other concerns at play where you're saying, okay, these are some things that are not normal, and now sleeping is out of whack, that would be a time that I would bring it to my doctor's attention. But if it's just intermittently or here and there, I wouldn't worry too much about it unless it was suddenly different. Fair enough? Does that make sense? Easy peasy? If not, I can get you more answers, and I promise I can send them to you. All right, so we're gonna move on. I'm ready. All right. So one of the things that we know is that dementia occurs in folks that are over 65 primarily. Please know that based on this, every 66 seconds, an individual over 65 develops Alzheimer's disease in our nation. Every 66 seconds. So during this talk, it's quite a bit of folks, right? Okay, so what we also know is after age 80, depending on the research or study that you look at, you're anywhere from 50 to 80% higher risk of developing dementia. The one thing that we cannot change is that age and aging is the #1 risk factor for this disease, period. And that's something none of us can control at this time. So what we also know is that this is not normal aging, right? Any questions about that now? Okay, we're ready. All right, so Alzheimer's disease, we now know is a type of dementia. It's where someone develops a cognitive change that results in the brain, usually over a very gradual amount of time. One of the families I'm working with right now, it's been 18 years. We're now getting to where we need to look at, okay, it's getting a little much. So it's been a long, healthy life. We've had a slow progression, lots of quality in their marriage, and now it's getting a little much for the wife, and we need to start looking at support for her in her home. So we've got different levels of longevity with this disease. What we find is that with Alzheimer's, some of the things that we see is the difficulty remembering some things. We may miss an appointment. If you miss one, please don't write it down. If you miss several this month and next, you may want to ask a question to your doctor. You may want to say, hey, because please know on average, Americans are on a minimum of 5 prescriptions a day. Of those 5, they all have side effects. Of those side effects, I promise you they're interfering with each other. Now, if we're going to add a disease of the brain, we have no idea what that outcome's going to be. So please know that I've seen a lot of misdiagnoses or misassumptions because of medical side effects, interfering or a change med. So please know if you change a medication and all of a sudden you start noticing these things, I would want to ask about that medication before we jump to a dementia. Fair enough? I'm ready. Oh. All right. Everyone is affected differently. So my prime example, if you know one person with dementia, I know I said this once, but you only know one. So in my communities, on average, over the years, my last property in Florida, I had 100 residents. Of those 100, 50% had active diagnoses of dementia. Of those, around 30% were in a secure environment because that's what they needed to be. Fair enough, right? So I want you to imagine doing a fire drill. In a community, states say we have to test our fire drills and our smoke detectors and all of those lovely things. So I want you to imagine having limited safety awareness, being in a secure environment and having to do a drill. I've had individuals climb in dryers, go figure. I've had one of my engineers, he got out of his first floor apartment with a butter knife through the window. I had a young lady in my ceiling tile. Young being the operative word, she was in her 70s, but she was sprightly. She got off of a dresser into a ceiling tile. All of these individuals shared one thing. They had a diagnosis of dementia in one form or another. But how they responded under fight or flight was completely different. My best example in giving you that is that every day is different. We never know how we're going to respond to something, but oftentimes when we learn who we are, spouses, y'all have the best diary of all. I get to learn all about your likes, your dislikes, behaviors, patterns, habits, work history, relationships. Those are all of the tools that individuals need, especially spouses and loved ones, to care through this disease. Those are all the sweet spots we need to get what we need out of that individual, whether that's dressing today, whether that's taking a shower, brushing our teeth, going to the store. The list is a mile long, but there's a personal connection, and when we make that, we're able to see before an event happens. If I know that Miss Smith is my 70-year-old track runner and she's going to get in my ceiling tile, you better believe Miss Smith's going to help me carry out that fire drill. Okay, and we may make it silent next month so that I'm not putting that much stress on an individual. Because if you take away dementia and I have a fire drill right here, I would lay money on the fact that every one of you would probably do something different initially. Whether it's, oh my gosh, whether it's somebody panic. I've always had somebody scream. I've had individuals pass out. I've had folks fall down, and then I've had people run. But everybody manages that stress differently. Adding dementia does not change that. We're still who we are. We just execute it a little bit differently. Fair enough? Yeah. All right. Oh, did you have a question? I'm sorry.
Can you say anything about memory from way back when you were a child, teenager, and so on, compared to recent memory?
Absolutely. So the question is commenting on memory. Long-term memory, short-term memory, and all the space in between. So what you're going to find is with this disease, long-term memory is the last to go. If you think of an onion, under my umbrella, you now have my definition of dementia. In that onion, we have short-term memory, meaning what I just said 5 seconds ago, okay? Every layer is a different memory that goes further back. It's going to take us a while if we peel every layer of an onion, right? The brain is no different. It attacks different parts of that brain, but as they unfold, we go deeper. What we hold on to is going to be the center. It's the last to go because it's in the innermost core of the brain. So if you imagine all those surface folds are starting to be attacked and we're shrinking and we're folding and we're losing our volume, we're not as pretty, our color's not pink anymore, and it's starting to not work so good. But the fact of the matter is, I can still remember the street I grew up on, my phone number at the first place I had a phone, how much my 5-cent soda and hot dog was when I went to the theater in New York when I was 13 was my Andy. And Andy couldn't remember his wife's name. He couldn't remember anything except past the age of 15. But I knew the street he grew up on in New York, how much a movie and a hot dog and a soda was, and how often he went there by bus. That never left him. Those childhood memories were there until the very end. So think of that onion, and as we start losing some of those surface memories, but we keep going closer into the core, those are still there. And that right there is how you can connect with an individual. Know those memories. Bring them up. If it happened yesterday, you may not get a conversation. It may turn into an argument. But let's go 20 years back. That's fresh as a dime. So that's where we start seeing the change. And when you understand what's happening with the brain and how this disease affects it, you still get to have an engaging relationship, regardless of the relationship. And you can have quality with this disease all the way to the very end if you're willing to work through the hurdles. I promise it's so worth it. So for this, signs and symptoms, this is where I give more examples. I really like it to make sense. So with Alzheimer's, we've got these things of not remembering, forgetting appointments, but what does that look like? Again, it's things that are not normal that stand out to me, things that are not habitual, things that we don't normally do that should stick out. So if you forget something and then you don't remember that information, and you can't remember who it was you had that conversation with, and that's not normal for you, make a note. Make a note of the day. I can't remember this. And let's see if it keeps happening. Not just a one-timer, but let's look at, you forget to pay your monthly bills. These are my accountants. I love my accountants because they're meticulous. I'm a numbers girl. I love numbers. I'm operations. And I love everything to the penny. I want to balance out every month no matter what. I still use a checkbook. So go figure. That was the way I learned to do it. That's the way I do it every month. Okay? So when I can't do that, one, my family is going to panic. But two, that would be not normal. That's where those are the big red flags for me. And that's what I really want to give you to take away tonight. Go ahead. All right, difficulty completing task. Does anybody love to go grocery shopping? Okay. Whew. So this is my least favorite thing to do. I despise grocery shopping. I make a list. I have my coupons down to the aisle. I get what I need and I get out. I don't want any talking. I'm just there on a mission, serve a purpose. So it's when I take my family with me that I realize I shouldn't have. Because everything is shiny and they want it all, and it's not on my list, and I am there on a mission. So when we're there and I'm on that mission, and let's say I don't have my coupons. Let's say I don't know everything before I go. I don't have everything lined up. That's a red flag for me. If I start going willy-nilly and not paying attention to how much I'm spending, it's a concern for me. I want to be mindful of that. So if there's a time where I stop clipping coupons and I'm not proud of how much I saved when I leave that store, my family knows that's going to be a red flag for me. You've gone to the same grocery store for 20 years and suddenly you're not sure how you got there. That's a time to know that that's not normal. Okay? And it happens. Yes, sir. Oh, that's a great question. So that's a different conversation. He asked about aspartame and dementia. I'm not an expert on defining everything in that field. However, it's not a natural chemical that we're putting into our body. Unnatural chemicals are not necessarily absorbed by our body. So perfect example I can give you is, everybody knows a Crisco, right? Best thing on our pots and pans growing up, great thing for fried potatoes, if anybody's from the South, okay? But not so good for you. When we take a chemical that is not natural, our body doesn't know how to break that down. So if you put Crisco in, Crisco stays as Crisco is. Aspartame, my best example. It's a man-made chemical. It's not one that's familiar to our body. So your body is going to do what it can to get through that. But how that turns out is really indicative of your body's DNA and how your body processes that chemical. Fair enough? It's debatable on how long you've been using a chemical. So the question is, if you stop some bad habits, or aspartame, for example, do you start to see those side effects or some of the risks disappear? The answer is not always. I was just looking before I came tonight on genetics and also on changing habits. So the folks that have the best medical history, the best nutrition, the best life habits have the lowest risk factors to all diseases. Where we start changing that and adding chemicals and other substances, we start changing our outcomes. And that's the best sum I can give you off of that article. Yes, sir. I'll be right with you. All right. So I'm going to do my best to sum that up in a short way. So his question is today in technology, we've got phones that serve as computers, we've got tablets, we've got computers, all of these things that are forcing information overload anytime we're on them, right? TV, you have now 20 minutes of commercials for every segment. So it's pumping more information in versus how it was in younger times when we didn't have cell phones or computers. I think I'm the last generation that wasn't raised with them, so my kids don't know how I survived. The question is, does that impact our short-term memory or lead to potential symptoms of dementia? And the answer is yes. It doesn't lead to dementia, but it can give you some symptoms because it's a lot to take in. The last study I was doing during grad school was with all the sensory overload. I'm the world's worst. I'm a multitasker. I have 2 screens on my computer. I have my phone going. I'm checking emails. I'm writing a thesis or I'm doing a report. Right now I'm doing 2020 budget plans. All of these lovely things, right? So my brain is constantly picking and pulling. They are showing that now we actually use less of our brain than we did 20 years ago. The reason is when we were back before technology, that was about 20 years, right? 20 years ago, I had to remember everybody's phone number. I had to know how to get where I was going because it was either a map or I knew the way, right? It was if I needed to call somebody, I had to find a payphone, and I still keep change in my car. For whatever reason, I'd never find a payphone. But we had to use our brains to navigate, to find things. Even dictionaries, we found the answers. Nowadays, things are so easy that we don't use as much of our brain to find the answers. So it's almost a cataclysm. I'm hoping eventually we come back. I just don't know that we will in our time. But eventually what you will find is that when you start taking more time off of technology, getting that break, there are a lot of games and different cognitive things you can do for recall. There's a program called Quick Wits. There's different study games, word games, all kinds of fun things that we can do to find the answer. I know I'm going over, folks, and I don't want to keep you. Yes, ma'am. Oh, goodness. Okay, the question is on brain scans. Nowadays, we have dye and without dye, which PET scans, MRIs, CT scans, there's a dye contrast and a non-dye contrast. The dyes have heavy metals. The question is the impact it has on the brain. I'm going to be honest, I would need to look at more research. I honestly don't have a full answer for you. I can get some answers, and I can send you those resources. I'm partnered with the Luruvo Center, so I would need to reach out to one of my clinical partners over there and ask for some of that feedback because I haven't looked at a recent study on that. I apologize. Yes? Okay, question was depression. Is it a side effect, or is it something part of normal aging, or is it something that's also indicative of dementia and a symptom? I'm going to tell you it's a symptom. With dementia, we have a number of symptoms. If you have a background of mental health, and there's bipolar, if there's PTSD with my vets predominantly, or an underlying tone of depression, oftentimes with dementia, a lot of those things become more heightened. So for my women, I had a female client. Her and her husband shared one car their whole career with 4 kids. And everything was on a 15-minute calendar. And when they were all gone, but the woman was left, everything stayed on a 15-minute calendar the rest of her life. So know that things can become very heightened. Dementia is a symptom with Alzheimer's or dementia. And I see that because we have one of 3 categories with this disease. There's one type of person with dementia that has no idea they have dementia. And I love these folks because they're blissfully unaware and totally unaware that there's something happening. And they are just pleasant and loving, and nobody would ever tell them otherwise. And then you've got this other category that knows there's a problem. I don't know what it is. I'm mad. I don't like it. I start getting more gruff, more behavioral, more heightened to speaking my mind, telling you what I think when I wouldn't normally do that. And I'd stop going out to play cards, stop going to church, and I quit doing the things I normally do because I know there's a problem and I don't know what it is and I'm mad about it. And then you got the third category who knows there's something going on, and you know what? We're going to work through it. It's like we just get our head on our shoulders and we can walk through this. And it's going to be a step at a time, and there's usually a lot of questions. But there's 3 different categories for that reason. Those that tend to get more isolated are the ones I see that increase in depression, because we now know that isolating socially, after 65, on average, an individual in this nation receives 1 visitor a week. That little stimulation and socialization is the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day on your body. So isolation is one of the biggest factors for depression. It's one of the things that can exacerbate this disease faster than anything. And removing yourself, it also physically causes a rapid decline in your health. Yes, sir.
What about age?
Age? In regards?
In regard to, did I skip this it altogether?
On the risk factor of age?
Yeah, I got old.
Yes, sir. So the risk factor is after 65, you become at a heightened risk. Every 66 seconds in our nation, someone is diagnosed with Alzheimer's after age 65. After age 80, we are at a 50 to 80% increase for developing this disease. Age is the only thing that we cannot control that is your greatest risk factor for developing dementia.
What about 90?
What about 90? You're doing great. After 90, the average is still the same. They're still showing right now that over the age of 80, you're at a 50 to 80% increase risk of developing this disease. I tell you, I had a female call me last week, and she told me she was 97, and she thinks she's got dementia. And I said, well, honey, that's all right. Let's keep going. You've had a great life. We're just going to have fun from here on out. You know, it's something we just don't know. It's just, we don't know. So if you start seeing some of those behaviors or some of those patterns that are normal, not be normal, then I would still write that down and take it to your physician. I also do a mini memory screening that the Alzheimer's Foundation put out, that the Lou Ruvo Center offers, and I offer that as well. It just kind of gives us, it's 3 questions, but it lets you see if maybe you should talk to your doctor or maybe you shouldn't. It's just a good little preliminary quiz. Yes, sir? So the question is, his wife says if they walk every day, they may not develop dementia. I'm going to say stick with your wife. Exercise does show to slow down the progression of the disease and even reduce your risk factor for developing the disease.
Okay, could we slow down on the questions now, let her get through, and if we have questions, maybe we can catch her on after the presentation. Thank you.
You got it. Go right ahead. We're almost at the end, I promise. We're ready? All right. So this is just reiterating nouns. Going back to that left side language brain, it's not having the ability to communicate. The example was Miss Justine that I gave you, and her ability to have her nouns as a journalist was very limited. And as she progressed in this disease, nouns were completely gone. Go right ahead. Yes, sir. I'm moving now. I recapped on most of these. All right, so this again, retracing steps, misplacing things. It's when we're doing things that we're not normally doing and you can't retrace your steps. Those are a red flag. I'm ready. See, I can move faster. All right, we did this, so I can go to the next one. All right, so back to those visual disturbances. We've got one slide after this, I believe, and I'm just going to end it there. So what I want you to do is this exercise. With this disease, I mentioned earlier peripherals, right? We can all put our hands out here, and we can see them. So what happens with this disease is we start moving forward, okay? And then it starts closing in. So I want you to make 2 hands like this. Make a circle. Now turn the palms down. Put those over your eyes. This is middle stage dementia right here. This is what you see. This is it. This is your scope of vision. A little scary, right? So I want you to take one and put in the middle of both your eyes. That is your pinhole at late stage and end stages of dementia. That's your vision. It's about like looking through an empty pen casing. So one of the courses I teach on virtual dementia is really throwing you into sensory. It puts you in these goggles. It messes with your hands because our sensory changes with this disease. We don't feel the same. We don't see the same. Our feet don't feel the same. We don't hear the same. Everything changes. So with that, when we have somebody that's in this disease, and we all know somebody, let's be honest, there's over 20,000 people just in the area, and I think, no, they said almost 50,000 people here in Nevada this last week with this disease. That's a lot. So if you go to the store, I promise you, you will see somebody that is impaired. It happens, we see it. And so with that, imagine if you come up behind them and tap them on the shoulder. If this is their vision, they don't see you. If you're at a dinner place and they're picking off a plate that's not their own, they can't see it. So what I want to give you to take away with is if you ever want to wonder what it's like to have middle stages of dementia, put your goggles up. I've had individuals that can't see my hand to shake my hand, so I do a hand up here and I reach out this way, because then you see me coming. If I get to get your hand, then I know I'm inside your personal space and we can go do something. But I have to be mindful of that, especially my veterans. I bring them up a lot. I had a father who was a Marine, POW and MIA multiple times at Vietnam. So his PTSD accelerated rapidly as he aged. That being said, I could not come without his linoscope to communicate to him. He would become very aggressive, very angry, and get ready to fight because he could hear something and not see you, and he would become afraid immediately. So knowing that if you have a neighbor, a friend, you see somebody at dinner, and you know there's something not right, make sure you get in front of them is my only point. Wave up here. Let them see your eyes. Let them see you're friendly. If they're a good friend, shake their hand. Give them a hug from here. But if you come up from behind them or beside them, they may not see you, or they may become startled. They may swing. So that, if nothing else, if I can give you to take away, that's one of my most fun things I take to schools and I take to the community, is when you understand what an individual sees and how you can work around that and still have that connection, maybe then you'll still go see that neighbor or that friend or wave at them at the grocery store, because that is so vital to their disease and their life. I want to thank you all so much for tonight. I made it through. Does anybody have any other questions or comments before we close?
Thank you, Nicole. We
Thank you so
really
much.
appreciate it. And if you do have questions, maybe you can grab her before she walks out.